Hello and good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Frank Gartland, and I work in the product management group here at Skillable. And I'm really so glad that you're joining us. For this fireside chat. I've always wanted to do a fireside chat since, like, I don't know, fifth grade, sixth grade, and I'm finally, getting this is a little dream for me. So I'm glad you can enjoy it. It's March 8th. I believe that's a Tuesday, and it's actually a little chilly here in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's only like 44, so I hope it's nice where you are. Well, for this fireside chat, we're going to talk about a topic that we kind of revolve around, and it has to do with skilling, right? Skills. We're skillable, which is skills and labs and abilities, kind of all rolled into one word. And I want to sort of talk a little bit about the problem in the planet that we think that it's uniquely prepared to help you to solve. And this is this notion of skills, like having people that can actually do the jobs that we need them to do because they have the right skills. And those skills are not just technical skills. People talk about technical skills, but this is where 4/5 of the skill shortage vacancies that we talk about all the time, or at least partially caused by technical or practical skills. And I tend to emphasize practical. A practical skill is something like, hey, I technically know the concepts. I technically understand it, and I can answer a question correctly. I can have a conversation about it. But a practical skill is what's needed when, hey, there's a problem, something's down. Who do we call to solve it? Once that person solves it, do they have the practical skills to explain what happened and make sure it doesn't happen again? The practical skills are also a big part of the shortage. And I think for those of us that have been in the training industry and different forms of learning and certification, all these really important industries over the last 30 or 40 years, one of the things that we ask ourselves all the time is, well, what's missing? Like, what are the things that we could be doing to help people have these skills? And I think that from our standpoint, a big part of it is live environments where people can really learn while they're doing something. You talk about people setting up sandboxes a lot, where, hey, just go out and play with it, right? Technical people love sandboxes, and they love going out and playing, and they learn while they do. Like, that's an important thing. But there's not a lot of live environments. Like if you want to learn AWS or Azure, well, you got to pay for that. Like, that's a thing. So that's a challenge. And then also, once they get in that environment, well, what are the methods to help them to develop mastery and confidence, right? What are the scenarios at play? Like, is it a realistic, genuine kind of environment that I'm in? And do I have kind of a problem to solve, right? And if I solve it, did I solve it right? Is anybody validating it? Do I know if I did things correctly? Because if I just did something, but I'm not sure if I did it perfectly or good, then the confidence is kind of not there, right? So again, when that problem happens, I might not be the one that rushes to solve, right? The next bit is scaling. Like, I remember in the 90s when I was an instructor, and I used to build out all these hands-on training labs. Oh my gosh, it was a ton of work. But figuring out how can I get this lab for these 15 people, or maybe the labs for 40 people or 100 people. How can I get hundreds of thousands of people around the world to understand this technology? Or I've got 50 people around the country that are sales engineers. I need to train them, and then I've got another like 400 sales engineers that are at my partners all around the world. How do I train them? I mean, these are real problems, and I think that because these things are missing, there's a current reality, right? And if you're on this webinar, I guess we can call it, no, it's a fireside chat. That's what it is. If you're listening to this fireside chat, I hope you can agree with me that there's a current reality that labs are hard. They're hard, they're expensive, and as a result of them being hard and expensive over time, organizations just like yours struggles with just the cost. Like, how are we going to do this? Well, we can't. We're going to just validate folks with just multiple choice, or we're going to let them practice on a simulation maybe, or we're just going to give them a sandbox, right? We'll let them figure it out on their own, right? These are the things that people struggle with. The how can we get labs to this many people? The next thing is, because labs are so hard, a lot of the time people are just like, I want to make it work. Like, go watch a bunch of videos and go, take some courses, right? And at the very end, we'll give them a lab that they can follow some steps. Those are really not designed to teach people anything. The teaching happened elsewhere. The lab is just kind of a, well, we're giving people the ability to play with it afterwards. So becoming more capable, and I would say becoming more confident too, is a limit there. And then finally, because they're not validated, it's that same thing. They're missing opportunities to get that all-important confidence. Big problem happening or big project. You want people that are shoulders back, confident, ready to solve that problem, right? And that's what we believe hands-on labs can do. So when you think about hands-on labs, I think another thing you really want to think about, what we think about is, well, what are the types of programs you can even use a virtual lab in? And I think skills development is that's the knee-jerk one, right? We all think about that. We've all been to a class where you sit down and there's a pretty smart person up at the front and she's kind of leading you through the week, and you've got your little computer and maybe a lab break, so you've got to share it with somebody else. Like that's kind of labs. We think about that a ton, right? And it's training, there's certification, there's labs and certification now, but it's all about skilling and upskilling your team or your partners or your customers, right? Also, there's a ton of companies that actually during an exam, like you'll be sitting there taking your exam, a little sweat bead runs down, and as you're doing it, you're answering a multiple choice question, right? And then all of a sudden there's a scenario, and you click a link, and there's a full-blown environment right in front of you. It's Linux or it's Windows 10 or it's Azure, and you've got to go solve the problem, and then afterwards you get scored on did you do it or not. Like that's real validation. It's real assessment, and there's high stakes assessment like a certification exam, at a testing center or a remotely proctored one. And then there's also like mid stakes and low stakes forms of assessment, right? You might want to just create a simple certification program for your sales engineers, for example, right? You might want all of your developers to pass a certain type of an assessment, right? You might do it during pre-hiring or during onboarding. All those sorts of things that will help you go, yep, this person is ready to do that task or those sets of tasks. Well, there's other things too that we're finding more and more people are doing. And so, for example, customer support. Like so many times, especially if you're an organization that has a very expensive, very, very customizable solution, just having an environment that your customer support can sort of reproduce to help solve a complicated customer problem, that's a thing, right? And sometimes virtual labs can really help organizations, especially technical ones, to have the right scenarios at the fingertips of the customer support people in a cost-effective way. Like this is a fast-growing scenario for virtual labs, and I think at the same time there's sales enablement. Quite honestly, this is the one that I'm probably most excited about. This notion of how can we make sure that the sales engineers and the technical account folks, that they know how the product works, like they can demo it right, or when they're designing a solution, they know how the platform works, or maybe it's like, hey, it's ready to deploy it. All your partners all over the world that are helping your customers or your mutual customers to deploy that solution. Everything from the initial demo through the proof of concept to, hey, they're up and running, right? This is a huge set of skills. There's a swath of skills that we need to train people on. And then finally, there's these marketing and events kinds of needs where, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could get 5,000 people to join this really cool event, and we're going to do some labs for some of the technical stuff. We'll do some training while we have the captive audience. Like let's either skill them up or let's validate them, with some certifications, things like that. We're finding more and more and more customers are doing that, especially with the atmosphere over the last few years. So with all 5 of these different scenarios, and I hope that you've been thinking about 2 or 3 of your own that make sense for you, how do you do that? Like, is it something you could do on your own? Well, you could, it's hard, like we talked about, but I think that for us, we believe that we're the type of partner that can help you to do this, because really we have developed over the last 10, 15 years a series of technologies that is a platform, and this platform, it allows a ton of things. And I think we start at the bottom of the graphic, right? It's first of all, it's all about scale. Your customers our customers, our collective customers, right? You need a platform that can reach the people, that's trustworthy, right? That, when someone clicks launch, that lab is going to launch. In 21, we did 5.6 million labs. I mean, we launched more labs than any other platform around by a long shot, right? We have 5 data centers around the world, and a ton of RAM. We just had a great press release actually last week. I believe it was last week, where we talked about yet another investment we're making in our data centers. Now, a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, it's cloud. Like, why do you need data centers? Well, it's true that there are some situations, if you're doing Azure labs or if you're doing AWS labs or GCP labs, like, yeah, that's cloud. But for a lot of lab situations, there's still like, hey, the learner is on a Windows PC or they're on a Linux box, and they've got to configure a server that communicates with the cloud. Like, there's lots of complex scenarios in the world of skilling. And so we have a tremendous set of resources in our data centers to help make sure that all those environments work for you and your customers. I think the next thing is just this idea of building live learning experiences, right? We build a lot of them. They're called challenge labs. We've got a library of them. So we sort of eat our own dog food with this platform, of course. Like, we build our own. But I think what's most important is, okay, you have a technology that you have to skill people on. Well, how are you going to do it? Like, building a lab is hard. It's hard. Like, we got a great platform, but still, it's one of those things that if you're a technical person, it's like one of the coolest things in the world. Like, literally, you'll talk about it to your buddies for weeks because it's fun, it's cool, but it's hard. It's not for everybody, right? So if you want to say, hey, we've got a group of folks that they're great technical people that will be able to build these labs with us, hey, we've got a phenomenal self-serve platform. You don't need to reach out and get our okay on things. You can publish, you can create. We'll help if you like. But then there's also full service, where we've got teams of people that can build great labs, and we can help you from the ID phase and ideation all the way through the development and QA and to launch, and then self-serving and either doing it whatever model you like from a lab development standpoint. Another big thing here in development is, especially when you talk about skilling, like, skilling has a new concept, right? Like, training means, hey, I went to a training class and I got my little class participation thing. I actually went to lunch late, or, late and early, both times, but I got my completion certificate, right? The notion of skilling connotes that not only did you go to class, but you actually were validated for learning something. The skills that were taught in that class, you validated that you have them, and now they're skills. That's skilling, right? So having a lab that has a scoring engine where someone can go through the tasks and then at the end go, yep, you did it. Not only do they know it for confidence, but you know it for a different type of confidence, right? So having this real-time scoring engine is important. I think next thing up is all the learner management, like knowing who knows what, knowing who's taken which labs, knowing which skills do folks have, figuring out, how do I get all this information into my LMS? Like, we do have a small LMS, and we call it TMS, a training management system. So if you don't have one, never fear. Like, we've got one for you that's very well integrated. But we also have a complete set of APIs and LTI if you have your own LMS, and we can help you get that stuff going. So let's do this real quick. I'd like to just take a moment and show you a couple of things, right? Just to give you some context, because the most important thing is that I pique your interest enough so you say, you know what, I think I want to learn some more. Like, this is kind of interesting. The Frank character was a little bit funny, but I think overall the solutions seem pretty good, right? And that's what my hope is. And so the way this works is basically a lab developer might go into this is kind of the front door of a platform. And the thing right here is to give you an idea. They'd say, hey, create a lab profile. Lab profile is I'm building a lab. And from here, they can start, they don't have to, but they can start with their template gallery. The beauty of this is, if you think about it, let's say I want to create a data science lab. Okay, well, wait a minute. Data science, that's a lot. In data science, you're going to have, a big, beefy, virtual machine, like a Windows machine, probably a Linux machine. You're going to want to install Jupyter Notebook. You're going to want to install tons of different sample data things. And if you're a data scientist, and you're like, well, I need to create a lab, it might take you a week just to create the lab, right? So if you look at data analytics, like, we've got one right here, and it's got tons of stuff in it. R, Python. I mean, whatever you would need to do data science is here. So you can simply go ahead and I'm going to just create my little lab template from here. I'm going to name it. And then after you're done, you customize that and create your own template. Now you got your own personal template, and then you can go to your 10 lab authors and say, hey, use this thing to build your learning experiences, right? There's a ton of things in here, not just, there's coding, a bunch of things that, Windows 10, there's a bunch of Linux flavors. If you want to look at like even, CentOS, there's Kali, Ubuntu. I mean, there's tons of different, of course, Windows, but lots and lots of different environments that are pre-built just to save you time, right? And then once you have that lab template, your teams can actually build a lab. So let me show you what a lab looks like. Here we go. I'm right now looking at a lab. And if you've never seen a lab before, you're like, huh, really? Doesn't look like a lab. Well, it's a lab. So basically with this lab, this is one where we're over here on the right column, you can sort of see that this is the lab instruction. This is what the lab author has sort of said, okay, here's what I want to teach you. And he or she has written these instructions and kind of got this thing going. If I go past my scenario and I click next, you'll see that there's steps of what we want, what this lab author wanted someone to do. This whole section over here on the left, this is actually the environment. Now, in this case, it's AWS. This is a live AWS tenant, if you will, right? And from here, I literally follow the steps. So I'm going to create a virtual private cloud. Okay. Name the network, VPC, because I got to know what to name it and create some subnets. So I would go in and I'd say, well, VPC, okay, here's VPC here. And I'd literally go through the steps of creating this virtual private network in a very secure, very meaningless part of Azure, right? It's included in the cost of the lab, but if I completely blow it up, nobody even knows. It's just me and my little lab, and I can relaunch it, no problem. It's super safe, but I can learn while doing is the big thing. Now, I'm not going to bore you with it because I'm not an AWS expert, although I can complete this lab eyes closed, just so you know. Just, not bragging, just letting you know. So let me finish up with two quick notes. I think that the cool thing about labs is that you can have a platform where you and your teams can build the sort of skilling experiences that enable your audiences to learn what you need them to learn, and you can validate it. But I think when you get down to it, it's like I have two things that I just want to get practical a minute. Like, okay, if I wanted to build labs, let's say you're building labs today, or you've never built labs, somewhere in between. Like, let me show you sort of how it works. I mean, first of all, you decide, well, what are we teaching on? Is it cloud? Is it application development? Is it VMs? Like, what am I teaching on? And then basically you'd say, okay, well, how do we want to teach it? This is like the pedagogy, right? This is, well, do we want to do this with, with video? Like, how do we want to teach it? And where do labs kind of fit in? Is it a very labs forward kind of pedagogy, which hands-on labs first and the content comes after, which is kind of what we prescribe a lot of the time? Or is it a more traditional, all the content's there and then the labs are at the end? Like, figure that out. And how do you want to do the labs? Do you want to score them, or do you want to just have people walk through a recipe, right? But once you determine how you want to build a lab, then you choose a template, like what I just showed you a minute ago in our gallery. Choose a template. Then basically you tailor it, and you're like, okay, and this is your technical folks, like, let's set up our user accounts and our data. Let's configure the way we want to score it. We want to figure out how we're going to score it, like all that sort of thing. And then you go ahead and save that whole tailored environment as your own custom template. Then, these are your lab developers, is what we like to call them. These are the people setting up the environments. And then it's like, hey, let's go to the SMEs of the product, and they're going to actually author labs, writing the steps and putting in guidance and remediation, and they're working with the ID team, and we're making sure that the actual learner experience does what it needs to do. And then finally, they publish them. This is where you do your QA and everything here. And then usually you're going to publish it to our TMS, where your learners will go, or through an API that goes to your LMS. And you might have just labs as standalone items, like in learning plans. You might have them folded into different courses. Like, there's 1,000 ways, maybe 1,001 even, that you can do this, right? And so the idea then in the end is how do you start recognizing ROI? And I think the tip here is in this templates, is that one, not only is the skilling higher quality and a better experience and more engaging, but in the end, you're architecting labs, your environments where you're choosing templates you're telling, and you're saving your custom template, and you're reusing those to create all sorts of different experiences for this particular use case. You can do scored hands-on labs. You can still do sandboxes even if you want. You can even then create a performance test from that. So just take away all of the remediation and description and just see, hey, can you do this? Rewrite the questions with the experience. The whole experience is the same. And then you might even go to a different department and repurpose these things so that different teams and different audiences can do things, even including like, hey, let's have someone go through a couple labs before we actually do an interview. Like that might save some time, you know? There's a ton of spots there that I think are interesting, but you know, above all, my hope is that I've lightened your day. Your Tuesday will be a little better because we were together, but also that you decide to take another step and just learn a little bit more. Like we've got a lot of fun people that I work with that would love to explain some things and learn about your situation and how we might partner with you to hit your goals. Thank you very much, everybody, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.